Some books just tell you about history. But every now and then, a book comes along that tries to completely change the way we see it. Today, we're putting one of the 20th century's most ambitious and, let's be honest, most controversial ideas on trial. Jared Diamond's Guns, Germs, and Steel. And it all started with one single, incredibly simple question.
It all kicks off with this one moment, right? Back in 1972, a New Guinean politician named Yali asked the author Jared Diamond this very question. Now, he used the local word cargo to describe all the manufactured goods, everything from steel axes to medicine, that Europeans brought with them. And his question was simple. Why was there such a massive gap in technology and wealth between their two peoples?
And you see, Yali's question wasn't just about his home in New Guinea. It was a question about the entire planet. Diamond's attempt to answer it became this global bestseller that offered a totally radical way of looking at the last 13,000 years of human history. And boy, did it start a firestorm of debate that is still raging to this day.
All right, Section 1, Yali's question. Before we dive into Diamond's really controversial answer, we've got to first wrap our heads around the central problem he was trying to solve.
So this is the big one, the multi-trillion-dollar question, right? Why did societies in Eurasia end up with the tech and the power to conquer other parts of the world, and not the other way around? For centuries, the unspoken and often, let's be honest, explicitly racist answer was that Europeans were somehow just better, biologically superior. Diamond's entire book is basically a massive attempt to prove that that idea is completely 100% wrong.
Okay, Section 2, Guns, Germs, and Steel. So what was Diamond's answer? He starts by looking at what he calls the proximate causes, the immediate tangible stuff, the actual tools of conquest that gave Europeans such an insane advantage.
And to see this in action, Diamond points to this just shocking story of Francisco Pizarro meeting the Inca Emperor Atahualpa. Get this, Pizarro has just 168 soldiers. Atahualpa has an army of 80,000. 80,000! And yet the Spaniards, with their steel swords, armor, and guns, they capture the emperor and slaughter thousands of his men in minutes. But their deadliest weapon was one they couldn't even see. It was germs.
But that just leads to another question, right? Why did the Europeans have all this stuff and not the Incas? This brings us to the absolute heart of Diamond's entire argument, the ultimate cause. And for him, it all boils down to one single thing: geography. So here's the whole theory laid out like a chain reaction. It all started, he argues, with farming, the domestication of plants and animals. If you were lucky enough to live in a place with the right species, you could create food surpluses. And once you have extra food, not everyone has to be a farmer anymore. Some people can become specialists, soldiers, inventors, writers, bureaucrats. And that specialization, fueled by these big, dense populations, is what kickstarts the development of technology, writing, and eventually the guns, germs, and steel from the title. See how it all connects?
So, why Eurasia? Diamond points to the literal shape of the continents. Just look at this map. Eurasia stretches from east to west. That means crops, animals, and ideas could spread super fast across thousands of miles because they're all staying at roughly the same latitude with similar climates. But the Americas, they're oriented north to south. That creates these huge climate barriers. Think about trying to move a crop from Canada down to Mexico. It's a massive challenge. And that, he says, slowed the spread of everything, agriculture, technology, to a snail's pace.
To explain another key piece of this geographic puzzle, Diamond borrows this really clever idea from literature. You know that famous first line from Tolstoy's Anna Karenina? Happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. Well, Diamond says the same thing is true for animal domestication. For us to successfully domesticate a wild animal, it needs a whole checklist of traits. It's got to have the right diet, a calm temperament. It has to be willing to breed in captivity. The list goes on. If an animal fails on just one of those things, like say the zebra, which has a notoriously nasty temper, it's a no-go. You just can't domesticate it.
And this is where Eurasia basically won the lottery. Of the world's 14 major domesticated mammals, an unbelievable 13 of them were native to Eurasia. The Americas, they only had one, the llama. This gave Eurasians this incredible head start, not just in food, but in transport and military power. Just think about what a game-changer horses were.
But living so close to all these farm animals for thousands of years had this deadly side effect. The absolute worst plagues in human history. We're talking smallpox, measles, the flu. They all started as diseases in domesticated animals and then made the jump to humans.
over centuries, Eurasians living packed together in cities and towns built up at least some immunity to these diseases.
But the people of the Americas, with almost no domesticated animals, had zero exposure, no immunity whatsoever. So when Europeans arrived, their germs were like a biological atom bomb. They killed up to 95% of the indigenous population. 95%. That, more than any gun or any sword, is what cleared the continents for conquest.
So, that's Diamond's theory in a nutshell. It's this grand, elegant, all-encompassing explanation for the shape of the modern world. It won a Pulitzer Prize, it totally changed how millions of people thought about history, but for a lot of professional historians and anthropologists, the trial was just getting started.
Yeah, the pushback was intense. Specialists started pointing out that in his search for this one big, simple narrative, Diamond kind of smoothed over a ton of complexities. This quote here, it's actually from a user on the subreddit Ask Historians, who is inspired by the book to go study anthropology, and it really captures that feeling. The messy, complicated details of real history just refuse to fit into such a neat little box.
Another big criticism was aimed right at Diamond himself. I mean, he's a biologist and a geographer. Was he really the right person to be making these huge, sweeping claims about all of human history? Critics argued that he just didn't have the nuanced training of a historian, and that led him to make these arguments that specialists in the field found, way too simplistic or sometimes just flat out wrong.
So the main case against Diamond really boils down to this. His theory gets labeled as geographic determinism. Critics say it gives way too much power to the environment and basically writes human beings, our cultures, our choices, our innovations, our politics, right out of the story. They say it reduces the vibrant, chaotic, unpredictable story of humanity to a simple formula, and it ignores countless examples of societies that just don't fit the mold.
All right, Section 5, the book's legacy. So where does that leave us? Was Guns, Germs, and Steel a brilliant masterpiece or a deeply flawed oversimplification? Well, the verdict on its legacy is, maybe not surprisingly, pretty complicated. On the one hand, you can't deny this book was a cultural earthquake. It got millions of regular people thinking about deep history and geography in a whole new way. And this is really important. It provided a powerful, science-based argument against racist explanations for why the world is the way it is. But on the other hand, it's still heavily criticized by academics for being deterministic, for glossing over all the details that they spend their entire career studying. And that really brings us to our final thought. Maybe the true value of Guns, Germs, and Steel isn't about whether Diamond got the answer 100% right. Maybe its real genius is in the incredible power of the question it forced all of us to think about. Why did human history turn out the way it did? Because even if the answer is flawed, just wrestling with a question that big, well, that changes how you see everything.